Hey everyone, welcome back again. We are on our final session of the Excel webinar series, and we are going to be talking about how to discover more accurate projections with Excel data tables. Last time you have to hear all my spiels. My name is Jamie Newton. I'm the communications manager, and I am your moderator today. And your presenter for this session is Jacob Fairclough, who we lovingly call Secret Jake here at Hannafin. He is a senior account analyst and a PPC Hero blogger. Hey, Jake.
Hello.
Thanks for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I'm excited to talk about data tables today.
If you want to tweet at Jake, you can tweet at him at RealSecretJake. So real quick, I'm going to go through all my housekeeping stuff. If you want to join the conversation, include the hashtag ThinkPPC in your Twitter tweets or use the webinar question box for questions. We will have a live Q&A at the end. As soon as you think of them, go ahead and put them in there, and we'll get to as many as we can. For those of you that have been with us the entire series, this is the last time you have to hear me talk about Hannafin today. So at Hannafin, we are a industry-leading digital marketing agency that manages and optimizes clients' paid search, paid social, and display programs. We run the world's most popular PPC blog, PPC Hero, and conference, HeroConf, which we'll talk just a little bit more about at the end here. And here's a quick look at all the clients that we work with. Also, if you have not downloaded them yet, we have 3 handouts in the handout section that is located right there on your control panel. 34 Excel tricks, the ultimate guide to Excel for PPC, and using Excel Solver for budgeting. So those are free resources for you. Go ahead and download those straight from your control panel. All right, we have a real quick poll question. So how often do you run projections? Daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, or yearly, or never, and you just don't care? All right, so Secret Jake, while they are filling out that poll question, how often do you run projections?
Oh, that's a tough one. Just the way I work, sometimes it feels like I'm running them every hour, and sometimes it feels like they just don't pop up. So I would put it, let's just round up to daily and say close to daily in some form or another. It's not every day where you have to readjust your budget, things like that. But some of the tools we're going to talk about today are a good way to not just look at budget, but maybe clicks, conversions, other things. And we'll eventually circle back on the end and say, you don't just use these tools for projections. You can also use them just to make sense of what's going on and see, is this realistic? Are we on the right track? Just get a better feel of what's going on in your account.
Perfect. Let's see what the audience said. All right, it looks like majority are running their projections quarterly or yearly. A good chunk of you said that never, or you don't care. I assume you care at least a little bit because you're here right now. And then lower end for daily and weekly, 26% of monthly. Okay, great. All right, so without further ado, Secret Jake, take it away.
All right, let's roll into this. It sounded like I interrupted some good questions on Elena's part, so I'm feeling the pressure to make it up to everybody. But hopefully we'll walk away with some cool tools and we'll get through this together. So what brings up questions or projections and trying to go down this path? It's quite a few people, but never. A lot of weekly and monthly. Just before we start, that's kind of expected. Especially if you're more maybe not the hands-on or not the straight like analytics and analysis part. You don't really need to worry about these on, let's say, such like a tactical basis. It's more of saying, hey, what's happening on this week or quarter, and are we actually going to hit those goals, or are we aligned with that? But the dreaded questions, at least on my end, come up if someone's asking because someone comes to an analyst because things aren't going right in the account, things are going wrong, going sideways, or they just aren't sure how to solve it. So we go and say, what would performance look like if we try to maximize impressions? What if our CTRs change next month? Or what these tables are going to be really useful for us, what would happen over the next quarter or month if our impression share changed by negative 15% or plus 15%? And all of these sound like relatively straightforward questions, but it's one that, especially if you aren't sure what to do, it's kind of easy to kind of just come up with your head and ballpark it and say, okay, maybe this would happen. But while that works for making some of those decisions, like if you're just in a meeting, you need to say, okay, well, this is what would happen, and this is how we would respond. It doesn't really give you a good benchmark or a number to work off of or something, because there are times when those numbers matter, and those have an influence on your choices in the future. So how much you're spending, how much revenue you're bringing in can dictate what you're doing with your advertising in the future, or how you are shifting those budgets back and forth. So step away from the abstract and dig in a little bit. So why would you use a data table? A data table allows you to quickly calculate a range of values. It removes the need to calculate calculate these values manually and help better outline multiple scenarios. So you've probably done it yourself, and you've created a table, and you've made a bunch of cell references and things like that. And this does something similar, but the upside of the data table we mentioned, it's built into Excel, and it just keeps everything nice and tidy. One of the things that can come up with projections is sometimes you aren't necessarily running them for right now. You're running them, you're running your numbers, and it either goes to someone else or it sits on your hard drive for a little bit. You revisit it a little bit later. Well, especially if you have a lot of experience, you can do lots of cell references, everything like that, and it makes sense in the moment. Sometimes looking back, it just gets real confusing. You aren't sure what you're doing. I'm trying to figure out the exact quote, but this is more going into programming, but it was one about commenting your code when you're writing code, because you might submit that homework assignment and say, God and I at the time were the only ones who know what's going on with this code. It's just nonsense. It's just a bunch of numbers at this point. So getting started, let's start off super easy. If you want to find the data tables, all you have to do is go to your data tab on your ribbon and look for the what if analysis, and then that's going to bring up that little drop down with scenario manager, goals seek, and data tables, and we're going to use data tables. So simple, right? You just click a button. But when you actually set it up, it's wouldn't say any sleights of hand, but it isn't exactly intuitive when you're setting it up the first time. So what are we doing with a single input table? We're going to use one of these when we want to change, just look at one single value, such as a change in CTR. How does that affect our total clicks or conversions? How does our change in conversion rate affect our metrics, and more? So while it's called a single input table, we'll show a few examples, but it doesn't have to be a single output. It's called single input just because you're manipulating one value. So as you're setting up the variables, we're going to use a very simple example here, one that's so simple it's almost silly. The numbers are rounded off really nice and evenly. You probably don't even need a data table to calculate the clicks based on your click-through rate like this. It's all in multiples of 10. You could subtract those and figure it out in your head. But once we know the value we want to calculate, we select the variable to change, and we place that value in a single column with the desired values for that variable. So in this case, we're going to calculate the total clicks based off of our impressions using a change in our click-through rate. So what we're doing here is we're starting with 2%, let's say maybe we're expecting a drop, and then we're going up in increments of plus 5%. So that's more of a quick tip if you aren't doing something like that, is you could either hard write these in and put 2, 2.5, 3.0, or you could use a reference and just increment it up by a certain amount, which is really helpful for something like this. Let's go. Okay. Slide didn't transition on mine. All right, so when you're setting up the formula, so we know the calculation for clicks. At least in this case, with the numbers we have, we can find it by impressions by click-through rate. And what we're going to do is towards the top of our table, above the column where we're going to put our output, we're going to put the formula we want to use. And if you aren't familiar with it, I think it came up in some of the previous sessions. If you're curious, why doesn't it say C6 times C7? What we're using there is using a named range, and that can be another really helpful tip. If you aren't using those, go ahead and use those. It makes it really easy to see what you're referencing. So here we're referencing the impressions times click-through rate to get our formula. And once we have that filled in, we can go to the next step. So now, once we have that, what you want to do is outline your table or highlight it. So here it goes from E4 to F10. That's where we have all our input columns and our output columns. And you're going to highlight that and then go back to that data ribbon and select the data table function. And it's going to bring up this pop-up menu that you see here with the data table. And this is where it can get tricky, but not too tricky, is you have a row input cell and a column input cell. And for a single table like this, we're going to use the column input cell because, well, the easy way to think about it would be that our our variables are stacked in a column. I know for me, my first impulse was to go to the row input because we're putting the data out across rows. But since the data we're referencing is a column, we're going to use the column, and in a few examples later, we'll show how to use that row. And so the output will come out, and I mentioned the simple numbers. We can look at that and say, okay, that's correct. Excel will calculate these numbers, and what it does is, so we put that formula in, I believe that's F3 or 4 on there, where you see that highlighted 2500. That's our value right now, and that's the formula we're using. But what Excel does is it basically drags that formula down, and then it replaces the data column, so our column E, it replaces those values with C7 in our original formula. So rather than being 100,000 times 2.5%, it goes down and says 100,000 times 2%, 2.5, 3, 4, and up to 5. So we go in there, so what happens, if you click in your table, you're going to see it has this equals table with the cell reference. All that's telling you is it's using that table functionality, and for that reason, sometimes depending on your version of Excel, it throws errors and gets a little buggy if you try and edit inside the cell itself. So don't worry if you see that it's intentional like that, just to keep the integrity of that table once it's built. The other thing to keep in mind is once you have the table built, it's kind of like any other formula. So as we look down column E, if we decide, hey, I'd rather go in increments of 0.25 or go in increments of 1, you go in there and it'll automatically update those numbers for you. So based on the input you're using, it'll change those numbers. It can be really helpful for playing with different scenarios if you decide to use that scenario manager to change your inputs. Another one will be maybe you want to base this off of your data. I know in the last few examples, they would have like VLOOKUPs and index match and things like that. So right here, we use this really simple example and said, hey, I'm just going to go from 2 to 5. But what if I want to play it out and say, what would happen in my account? Let's pull data over the last 90 days and look at our, I'm going to roll that back just to make that scenario make a little more sense. Roll it back over last year or so for this campaign or keywords or whatever we're looking at. And over that period, use the formulas and grab our min and max CTRs for that period, so we know what the historical performance varied between them, and then run those numbers that way. So rather than kind of coming up with these numbers yourself, you're saying, okay, so based off past performance, what range would we expect? So one of the things that came up, I mentioned that it's a single input table, but it's not a single output table. So as you look at right here, what we're doing, and this is if you start looking these up in Google and looking at data tables, you're going to see a lot of this in accounting. A lot of data tables in accounting, and they use these types of models where you have a lot of other values that depend on those variables you're using. So this one right here, it's using our CPC example and then calculating our profit, our revenue, and cost. So we're still using a single input for our CPC, but it's spitting out the values for F, G, and H. So it basically gives you that extra information that you can use to make those decisions, because like the last one, like I mentioned, it's a silly example. What are you going to do with the total number of clicks? Of course, the clicks, the reason you want the clicks is going to turn in conversions, and conversions turn into revenue or leads or whatever metric you're looking at, as long as using, as well as using like CPC, so you know how much it's going to cost at different levels. So you would set this up the exact same way. You would just highlight this time columns F through H, and then you would still go ahead and reference those top cells like you would before. So what if you want to use two variables? Because a lot of times in PPC, digital marketing, anything that falls under the umbrella, you're really curious to see how two variables interact with one another. So the example we're going to go over is how would ad testing and CRO impact our revenue, as well as you can answer those other questions we mentioned impression share earlier. So how would market changes lead to different return on ad spend levels? So projecting based on two variables, very similar to the last one, except this time, instead of just having some of our values in a column, we're going to build horizontally the second variable. So here we have CVR, and sometimes it's not the most common way to abbreviate it, but that's conversion rate, and our CTR. And what we did here is we took our current click-through rate and conversion rate, and then we went minus 20% and plus 30% on these rows, just to outline what would happen at different points, because as we're testing these, it's a very real possibility that some of our tests are going to fail. So we're going to see negative results, but you want to see, okay, so what if we do have a bad ad test and our click-through rate's down by 10%? What if we have a good conversion rate test and let's say it's really good and our performance improves by 20% on the conversion rate? What does the revenue actually look like at that point? Because we're losing in some areas but gaining in others, and is that something we can live with? So what you're going to do is, rather than just inputting your formula at the top of the column, the easy way to think of this, put it at the intersection of your row and column. So if you look right there, it's F6 for average. For revenue, we have impressions times the click-through rate times the conversion rate times the average order value to get our total revenue for this model. And then what you're going to do is you're going to select the entire cell, and just as before, we're going to input our column input cell in there. So this one, it's C9 to refer to our conversion rate. And in our row input cell, we're going to reference our click-through rate, because that's what we have going along the horizontal axis of our table. So once you have those in, we input those values, and it kicks out the revenue figures. So the next thing here is we can see, okay, so based off current performance over this period, let's say it's a month, we had $23,911 in revenue. But based off of this, we could see, so if we get 10% gains in both, it comes out to, we'll move, say, an extra $5,000–6,000 in revenue. Whereas if we somehow just lose on both of these tests, our click-through rates are going down, our conversion rates are going down, we're going to drop all the way to 1,500. So while these tables won't always tell you what you should do, because the one thing you have to figure in here is how likely is each of these scenarios. It's probably not likely that you're going to get plus 30%, plus 30%. It's probably going to be somewhere in the middle of this table. So just be conscious of the values you're choosing here and what you want to do. And like I said, it's not necessarily going to tell you what you should do, but it'll give you a range of those ideas of what could possibly happen. And you can say, okay, well, as long as we finish, let's say, as long as we don't drop between 10% on our click-through rate and 10% on our conversion rate, we'll still be okay to hit our goals. Looking at that, going to come up a little short of 19.5. Let's pretend that's our hypothetical goal, but we can live with it, and the ad testing is worth the long-term gains to keep moving forward. So I mentioned earlier that data tables can be really helpful for sense making. So rather than just looking at a projection and saying, let's lay out a few different variables and see what happens, you can just say, so what if we changed our variables here? Could we ever hit certain thresholds? So what you're looking at here on this table is we use conversion rate and average order value. How this came up, just to explain the scenario, is there was an account and they were looking and said, long term, I really want this account to be at a 40 times return on ad spend. It really needs to be there. I would be okay with 20 in the short term, but we really need to find a way to turn this around and really increase that. So if you're looking at the table up here, we're looking at our non-brand performance. Our current return on ad spend is 4.3, which is a very far cry from that 40 and is a really big jump up to that 20. So what we did with this table is said, rather than select realistic values, let's just outline this and say, what would be a moonshot? If you could increase your average order value by 150% and your conversion rate by 200%, you would practically be printing money, and I guess you wouldn't even really need this data table. It wouldn't be a problem for you. You just make it happen, click your fingers and have it. But as we outlined it here, it really is kind of that moonshot, because doing this over a month or a few months, especially if it's like a mature business or not just something where you're just starting out trying to figure out how to get those sales, that's a big, big jump on how you make that happen. So as we look at here and we say, okay, so even if we had our conversion rate go up by 200%, or average order value go up by 150%, our current non-branded performance would still be 12.8, which is well shy of the 20. So if you have this in hand, it's just that nice little piece of proof that you can go back to whoever you're talking to and say, okay, so where is this 20 or 40 coming from? Because at our current numbers right now, we aren't going to hit that. And then that's where you start to go back into your account and say, okay, is there a way we could drop our CPCs or something like that? Because that's one of the ways we can kind of drop our cost while hopefully not losing revenue and make it up that way. But otherwise, it's, yeah, you just say, okay, so we can't hit 20, but what would be the next likely scenario? Or looking at this, we talked about, okay, so let's say we're doing a really, really good job and we get our conversion rate up by 40% over the year and our average order value up by 10%, and we get there and we say, okay, so we could potentially break 6 this year. And otherwise, I guess in the disaster scenario, they say that's not good enough and everyone feels sad and there's no reconciling this. So the key takeaways. So to making better projections, it's always consider a range of outcomes and scenarios. You've probably used a lot of these formulas before to make your own projections over time. But what you want to do is take away from this is just use that range, because whatever formula you're using, it's never going to be perfect. And you want to use these data tables to show multiple outcomes. You should always treat your projections as a loose prediction, because your predictions or projections may guide your decisions, but they can't guarantee your results. And, sad as it was to show those examples and say, we won't hit 20 or 40, or our conversion rate or CTR could drop, it's a very realistic scenario that you want to account for in your planning, because the worst thing you could do is plan on, massively growing and growing and growing and then not hit it and have to figure out what you're going to do further down the road.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Secret Jake, for a great presentation. We're going to get to the live Q&A in just a sec. So real quick, I'm going to tell you guys about HeroConf and then also give you a different offer than what you have gotten previously if you've been on our other sessions. So HeroConf is the largest all PPC conference in the world: paid search, paid social, display, programmatic, mobile. A lot of great speakers, a really awesome event, and we will have a specific Excel workshop at HeroConf LA. So that is in the middle of April, April 18th through the 20th. Check it out. Go to heroconf.com and click the LA section. All right, and we have an offer. So this is a little bit different offer. So a solutions blueprint it's a free custom analysis for companies and brands that spend $15K per month in ad spend. So one of Hannafin's experts looks in your account, compares the structure and results to industry standards. So this is really great for an in-house PPC team. It's a great chance to double check your work with a fresh set of eyes. I believe, Secret Jake, have you done one of these solutions blueprints before?
Quite often.
Quite often. I think a few of our analysts have. So if you're interested in that, we'll leave it up for just a bit. Go ahead and click that. I'd like an account analysis from Hannafin. If not, click no thanks. All right, let's go on to the live Q&A. And we will get to as many of these questions as we can with the time that we have left. So, Secret Jake, which one do you want to tackle first?
We're starting to roll in, and oddly, there are multiple. So why are you called Secret Jake? Before we get into it, say, I am, apparently I'm very strange in the fact that I go by Jake or Jacob. I introduce myself as Jacob to everybody, but a lot of people call me Jake. And one time during an interview process, I said, hey, I'm Jake instead of Jacob, and everyone kind of went, what? He's been Jake the whole time. He's secretly been Jake. I don't know why I don't know. It doesn't bug me. It bugs some people. Yeah. So let's look. So what should... Okay, I'm hesitating because it's a good question. So what should we input considering a cause and effect situations to boost our conversions? Should I use the conversion results as an input? So if you were boosting it off of that, now that I read it out, I feel like this is one of those where I'm like, I just need to sit down and talk about this. So you could use your conversion results as an input, and that maybe would be, depending on what you're doing here, saying, okay, so we have our current conversions as an input. Based on our conversion rate, how would that impact it? Some numbers like that, or it could be you could use your conversions as an input if you're trying to calculate your revenues and everything like that. So I felt like that wasn't the best answer, but hopefully it gets you pointed in the right direction. So one would be, where are the average order value informations coming from? So there's a few ways you could do that. One, should it come from the clients? It depends on what client you're working with. So a lot of the times when I'm getting the average order value, I'm pulling it either from AdWords or analytics and using the conversion value divided by the number of conversions to get the average order value. The other way you could go, so if they just, if a lot of their sales are on the back end for some reason they're tracking in the analytics, that is kind of one you could use from, you could get it from a client, especially for sometimes lead gen, if they're selling like contracts or something like that. I've worked with a few clients who do outsourced IT or call centers, and they have average contract values because it's a long sales cycle. It's really hard to say what each one is worth each time, so you can use an average order value in there as a substitute and say the value falls somewhere in between there. Interestingly enough, I was doing this with HeroConf tickets the other week, so that's another use case for this.
All right, and that last question I believe I can answer is will you have access to these slides in the recording? So yes, we will send out the recording as well as all the slides from today's series on this Friday. So you will get access to those via email. All right, everybody, we have concluded our first Excel series. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around with us, and we hope that you enjoyed this series and got a lot out of it. Because this is the first time that we are doing this, we'd love to hear your feedback, whether via Twitter or through our email address there, marketing@hanfordmarketing.com. Is this something that you enjoyed? Is there something you would do different? Is there another topic, such as social or remarketing or whatnot, that you would love to see a series done like this? So if you have any input like that, please feel free to email us or to tweet at us. All right. Thank you, Jake, for your presentation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we will chat with you later. Bye.